Greetings. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to be discussing something that's slightly controversial, and delighted you all are here to learn and form your own opinions. We came in peace for all mankind. Those are the words left on the moon for all immortality by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. But let me repeat that because it means so much as humanity reaches out to space. We came in peace for all mankind. The problem is not all governments necessarily believe in peace or all mankind, regardless of rhetoric. Now, you probably didn't expect a space conference would have a talk about politics, world and military affairs, or even reasons why we should not cooperate with any particular nation's government. After all, we commonly talk of sending humans to Mars. And I agree with you, however. We shouldn't have to think of these things. However, there are free and trustworthy nations, and nations which have few or no human rights, and whose governments hack others' nations for their progress. I regret having to discuss such topics. However, I'm a realist analyst of international relations. If we do not look at the real world, we can make tragic mistakes. For example, you wouldn't trust a neighbor who claims your backyard is his and will fight you for it. You wouldn't entrust your technology to a hostile competitor. One very important note. I've been to China. I love the Chinese people, the history, the culture, the vibrant cities, and the industry, the skyscrapers. I took that in Shanghai, and that's the Forbidden City. And this is on a beautiful place called Westlake, where President Obama went for the G20 summit a few weeks ago. There I am. Gravity was a little off that day. I was at the wall. But I truly do love China, and I love the Chinese people. It's only the government that I have differences with. International cooperation for historic projects, such as human exploration and colonization of Mars and the Moon, could save years, share costs, and unite nations. From an international relations perspective, this fits into the category of cultural diplomacy, and it can do very good things when nations learn to work together. And of course, this worked very well for ISS. The allure of cooperation with China is that they mean business in ways we remember from our Apollo days. And they can have virtually unlimited funding if it fits their government's strategic goals. In this era of essentially flat NASA and science budgets, it's natural that many would look across the Pacific in hopes of salvation. A look at their space goals and progress is important. Skip through that. China is building a Kennedy Space Center magnitude launch complex and the world's largest rocket factory. They've launched 10 astronauts to orbit to date. They just launched last week their second Tiangong mini space station, and they plan to launch 2 astronauts to it in a few weeks. They're building a new generation of rockets, Long March 5, Long March 9, and so forth. And they actually have their own new space-type commercial rocket companies. And they plan more and larger space stations. Tiangong was based on a Salyut space module, but if you've seen pictures of their proposed one for the 2020s, it starts to look a lot like ours. And they landed, of course, a rover on the moon. These are all very commendable accomplishments. This is China's Long March 9 on the right. the tall one. And the Long March 5, which would be their crew, they're kind of doing an Ares type of thing. Whereas with SLS, it's man-rated and would carry both big cargo and crew and landers and so forth. But they're going to be doing man-rated launches on their 5 and then using the 9 more as an Ares 5 type launcher for landers and heavy cargo and so forth. However, as you may have noticed, there's a remarkable similarity between Long March 9 and a certain rocket that NASA's building. And that's probably no coincidence. China means what they say, and when they say they're going to the moon and to Mars, they'll probably make it, and make it perhaps sooner than we. Interestingly, on these specs here, you see payload to LEO, LTO, Lunar Transfer Orbit. MTO, where are they going? What's MTO? Exactly. So they are thinking ahead, and they're very serious about it. But we, as you may have heard in my talks over the last couple of days, seem to be stuck with sending our Moon-Mars rocket to lunar orbit for the next decade and perhaps more. And by the way, this is an illustration of a Chinese lunar lander and on the moon. Again, they have plans to get there. Go to the moon? Well, they put their rover on the moon.
Oh, but not
No. This is just an illustration. That was actually a mock-up they had. I think it was at the Shanghai World's Fair. I forget. But for all their progress, much of their technology was taken from us. Sometimes you'll hear the term greatest wealth transfer in history. And what that describes is China appropriating, stealing, hacking, or bullying our technology and Western technology for their purpose. And then they'll undercut us. And when the White House was arranging deals that could have allowed China to take our highest technology, Congress was, skip over here, their space program is a military space program. It is not a civilian program. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But those are some of their astronauts. It is a very military-based space program. So Congress was forced to halt cooperative deals between China and the United States. Again, it's not that we would want to. They're going to space. Why wouldn't we want to be there? Well, because they have a very, very, very dedicated espionage system that takes our technology for their purposes, which includes military. So we've had for a number of years a prohibition on such cooperation. It's not just what they do with it, but how they proliferate what they get and what they have. This here is China's JL-1 submarine-launched ballistic missile. This here is North Korea's KN-11, which was just test launched. They've had a few test launches. And experts have said that they're the same missile. So a China that transfers the most deadly weapons to the most unstable regime in the world, the one where you've got this nutcase who keeps redeclaring war and threatening to annihilate us, and they're building the atom bombs in which they can do it. That's part of the dangerous part. But China, in their quest, it's not just stealing, it's bullying. For example, in violation of the World Trade Organization, they require if you go into China and you want to set up a company, you've got to have a 51% partner. Oh, and you've got to give them your technology. So, you know, their excuse is, oh, this will be become indigenous technology. No. They're bullying Apple right now to surrender their source code, and Apple has been digging in their feet. And what's China been doing? Well, they're retaliating in ways that are sort of like bullying. They gave, I think, the iPhone trademark to some company. I don't know. It makes ladies' handbags or something. And they blocked the iTunes store and so forth. And so this is a poor track record to build trust as a partner in space exploration. Any cooperation further with the nation now preparing for war to seize the South China Sea, as well as hacking, skip through these, I got these out of sequence. That's the F-35. That's their F-35 from Stolen Plans. Well, the F-35 does all right. The F-22 had a bit of problems, but they got that too. We ought to buy it back from them. Their version's probably better. But this is the South China Sea. This is their legal extended economic zone. And this is what they are building fake islands in to seize. And it goes up to the beaches of some countries, encompasses the economic zones of the Philippines, Malaysia, and many other countries. But it's part of what they call the first island strategy. And yes, they do have a second island strategy and a third island strategy, which would extend their reach out into the Pacific and also into the Indian Ocean. And so if we believe that China will not seize the moon or claim it in some fashion, they're just setting a very poor example here. So if they want our cooperation, if they want to fly with us to Mars, the moon, and join our space station and many other ventures, well, one thing they could do to show some good faith, get rid of their attempts to seize that. 400 years ago, Spain and Portugal said, because each one was trying to say, we own this part of the ocean, and we own this part of the ocean. And so they came to a truce and said, okay, oceans, they're going to be free and open for everybody, because they're really screwing up commerce and things like that. And so we've had 400 years of freedom of the seas, freedom of navigation. And that's what's being lost here. Now, you may think, oh, they're going to have to, you know, put guns on the moon. Nah, China doesn't do that way. Even though the Soviets, on one of their Almaz space stations, they mounted a cannon. Look it up, even on Wikipedia. And I don't know quite why they did it, but you know, did they really think we were going to come up and attack them? But when the last crew left it, they had fun at least going through all their rounds. So that was the first weapons fired sort of Star Wars style. But no, all you got to do is say, pick up a phone to the president and say, you know, if you want rare earths minerals, or you want this, or you want that, then you're not going to the moon. Well, the way you break that is you simply go public. You know, the president would go and say, well, you know, we've been kind of bullied by China. They say they're going to cut off rare earth minerals. I think the outrage of the American people will turn them against a China that would threaten us, so that they could do something as tragic as that. But one thing that they've already been studying is putting a huge military radar system on the moon. Yeah, that's an exaggeration for the antenna. But this would cover a swath like this every orbit, rather than, in this illustration here, what a regular radar mapping satellite gets, you know, just little thin stripes and so forth. So they would be able to know the deployment of every force in essentially real time, in essentially real time. How am I doing on time? Pretty good.
About halfway through.
Thank you. So treaties, international cooperation, making humanity a multiplanetary species means absolutely nothing to the regime that is trying to break 400 years of freedom of the seas. If they'll do that, then they simply won't care about outer space treaties, moon treaties, or anything like that. By the way, space dominated by China, in the absence of the free world, say on the moon and on Mars, would be very hostile to the U.S. and would be very hostile to free enterprise, to commercial space. It would not be without precedent to have a UN law that says all nations that engage in space commerce have to divide up all their profits to all the nations. There's something kind of like that in the Law of the Sea Treaty. And I could see them doing that. Why? Because it would be a way to put competition out of business. Commercial space would cease, except for perhaps theirs. The U.S.-China Economic Security Commission's 2013 annual report states the close relationship between China's space industrial complex and the PLA, that's the People's Liberation Army, which runs their space program, suggests that even ostensibly civilian projects, such as the Shenzhou missions, their manned missions to orbit, and the Tiangong series space labs, support the development of the People's Liberation Army's space, counterspace, and conventional military capabilities. Further, the director of the Space Policy Institute at GW's Elliott School of International Affairs testified, China's human spaceflight efforts are managed by elements of the PLA and require industrial capabilities that are the same as used for military purposes. And by the way, there is no difference between a missile and a rocket. We launched our first astronauts on Atlases and Titans. Those were ICBMs. So what you learn for one directly applies to the other. Lieutenant General Ronald Burgess of the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency stated, China's true interest in space is to deny or degrade the space assets of potential adversaries and enhance China's conventional military capabilities. And we saw that several years ago when they blew up one of their own satellites in orbit, and that's now contributed to about a third of the space debris that can injure, damage, or destroy everyone's satellites. So it is China's government, not the people of China, that cannot be trusted with access to our highest space technology. And after giving the issue much thought and study over a number of years, sadly under their current regime, China could not be an honest partner with us, but could misuse our highest technology. So we must follow the same general philosophy we have with ISS when we go to Mars, the moon, or other grand goals. Invite partners from friendly nations, including adding India and South Korea, which has expressed interest, and I would love to have them as space partners. And there's probably other upcoming nations that could contribute to our program very well. But we should not invite hostile adversaries nor work with military-led programs. But there is hope. I hope one day the people of China will create a modern multi-party democracy with fundamental human rights for all, which ceases to be a threat to other nations and eliminates the seizing territory. And on that day, we could welcome China as a worthy partner with which we can safely share our highest technology. So I join with the freedom-loving Chinese people who I've met and throughout China in hoping that day comes soon. But until then, the free nations should unite in exploring space, to go to Mars together and to cooperate on many, many commercial ventures, and then one day welcome a free China as a partner. So in the meantime, let's have a friendly space race with China to the moon and Mars. And then hope one day we can have them join us. We have a few minutes for questions. There?
Yeah, I've read in a couple of places, although I've never seen it verified, that one of the primary goals of the Chinese space program is to develop helium-3 on the moon.
Yes.
See that as a future energy source.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
Oh, totally. They've been talking about that for, I don't know, 15 years or something. It is a serious thing. China is so dependent on outside energy sources. There's just a stream of tankers that just keep going around from the Mideast, more than we have.
Just to follow up, do you think in the debates and the discussion that we have in the U.S. about the energy crisis and future energy sources that we underestimate the importance of helium-3?
Sure. Well, the U.S. has only random and scattered bits of an true energy policy and an energy security policy. We really don't look far ahead. And the only reason that we have a glut of oil now in the market that's driven oil and gas prices down is because private companies did a lot of drilling and a lot of fracking and things like that, and that reduced our dependence on foreign oil greatly. And has driven down the oil prices to the great dismay of Mr. Putin. Next.
Please name for me a single Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, or shuttle commander, the person in charge of the mission who was not a military officer, and then tell me that we do not have a military space program.
Well, we've not had military people for a long time, and I don't think our early astronauts were active military at the time of that, and they were not working for the military. They were all working for NASA. We have a firewall. We have a very civil space program. We do not have a military space program.
If we have all this high technology, how come we're not on Mars?
When I do radio shows, and I love to do radio shows, I do them a lot. I'll sometimes do this gag, and I'll clear it with their engineer first, so he gets the sound effect queued up, and a blender sound effect. And I'll say, take out your phone, put it in a blender. Each piece you pick out of there has more computing power than the computer on Apollo. And so, yeah, we have the technology. We certainly could go. And when you look at the 8 years, JFK, we'll go to the moon in this decade. 8 years later, we were on the moon. That was the impossible. Oh my gosh, we just didn't know what we didn't know even. And it took, but we were able to accomplish that. Now, we have sort of all those black swans, the unknown unknowns, pretty well taped. And so, and we've had 50 years of development of spacecraft and life support and heat shields and everything you can imagine. So, yeah, it's one thing: national will, political will, and the desire to cough up a few bucks to make it happen. So, yeah, von Braun wanted to put us on Mars in the 1980s. And unfortunately, Nixon just kind of cut it, and Congress as well, and said, let's spend this money on other stuff. So yeah, no reason at all.
Yeah,
space program that we thought we knew about. It was just drawn behind the curtain. Has more information come out in the last 9 months that helps inform what you're saying? Because they really restructured and just shut right up as of January of this year. So
Well, here,
what's new from that?
well, you know, one thing that I look at is people will often look at what China has done over the last, you know, number of years in space, and it's been slow. But what we don't see is what's happening behind the curtain. And what's happening there is that they are building this Apollo-like infrastructure. They're building the world's largest rocket factories. They're even talking about launching 600, get that number into your skull, Long March 9s, SLSs, to create a huge solar energy array in orbit. That's the kind of thinking that they have. So what we see, they just launched a copy of a Salyut module, and they're going to stay in it for a few weeks, and then another 6 months or a year, they'll send up another crew. That's the tip of the iceberg. When they get going, it's going to be like lighting the candles on the shuttle, and we'll see a lot more in the back.
Yeah, when you were in China, did you meet with any Chinese space scientists who are active in the Chinese chapter of the Mars Society? And did
No,
you-
I would have loved to
and if
have.
not, why not? I mean, we'd have a chapter there, and I'm sure, I guess, I don't know for sure, that they would like to collaborate with us here in the United States.
Oh, I'm sure they would, and there's brilliant minds and creative people, and you know, again, my point, it's not the Chinese government
You didn't meet with
that's
them,
the
though.
problem. Yeah, it's the people are wonderful, and they would love to work with us,
You
but
didn't
their
meet with
government
them.
keeps sabotaging it.
Why didn't you meet with them?
You know, I wish I had. I did not have the time to do anything. I'd actually requested permission to see some of their space facilities or meet with some of their space officials. I was on a tour, basically. I did not have a chance to go off tour and do anything like that.
Members in China.
Sure. Well, maybe next time, and I can certainly get in touch with them through email. And got to wrap it up. So thank you all so much. Be happy to chat later.